Welcome. Thank you for being here. If you wouldn't mind giving us a like, and consider going ahead and subscribing as well, that would be fantastic. And if you really want to go the extra mile, go down to the description below and click the Patreon link. Lots of cool stuff going on there. As always, I love you, and enjoy the show, guys. Chrysalis, a story by user BeaverFur. Chapter 8. Numbers. War, I was realizing, was about numbers, about logistics. The more I thought about it, the more I examined the information I had gained from the spaceports in the worlds I conquered, the shipping manifests and flight plans, the contents of downed cargo vessels, the more I realized it was true. It felt somehow wrong to put logistics in front of critical topics such as military tactics and strategies, intelligence gathering and attack formations. The word itself, logistics, sounded dry and machine-like, a word belonging to the quarterly finance report of a gray corporation, one of those where workers wore uniforms and accountants ruled from behind cryptic ledgers, a word that felt out of place in a battlefield, almost like an affront, a slap in the face of humanity's long history of military leaders and their genius maneuvers. And yet it was true. At first, when I left Earth, I had considered myself one of those leaders, a general in command of an army of drones recurring to subterfuge and clever tactics to best my enemies. The trap I had laid in the asteroid belt was a good example of that. I was carrying the torch, following the steps of Sun Tzu and Alexander, honoring their past achievements by keeping our military ingenuity alive, even if humanity itself had perished. And for a time, it had worked. But the more I expanded, the larger my army grew, the less I could keep seeing myself as a military commander. No, I wasn't just the leader, just the commander. I was the state in its entirety, the whole nation. I was the generals, yes, but also the soldiers. I was the workers back home. I was the factories and troop transports. I was the truck drivers delivering loads of ammunition to the front lines, and the miners extracting raw resources. I was the dead bodies and the young men training to replace them. I was the system, the supply chains, the economy itself, a well-oiled, self-improving war machine continuously pushed to its working limit. The moment I began thinking like that, I started seeing the underlying patterns, the dependencies between my different factories, drones, and ships, the hidden relationships of supply and demand, the unbalances and inefficiencies I could fix. My fleets of drones weren't armies. Not really. They were numbers. Quantifiable, discrete measurements. A positive to the Zenvirian's negative. War was about numbers. Odd, then, that I had never been good at numbers. That I had always struggled with algebra and calculus. With the statistics course I had needed to take in college. I remember failing to grasp the abstract concepts, asking for help from my classmates when I got stuck with the exercises I had been assigned. Or had I? It was strange. As clear as my memory of failing in the course was, I also remembered teaching those very same concepts to my partners during my time at the Institute. Did I become better at it after college? I cursed again my fragmented, blurry memories. In any case, it all came naturally to me now. It was easy. To maximize the function that represented how many more assault soldiers I could produce in the time gained by removing one of the outer plate covers in their design, and whether that gain would compensate the increased losses due to enemy fire. To optimize the drone swarming patterns as to reduce their total fuel consumption. Or to figure out where to attack the Zunvir Republic to create the greatest amount of damage. What node in their economic and supply system was the most crucial, the most vulnerable? Take the planet in front of me, for example. It wasn't beautiful, not really. Yes, it could support life, had an atmosphere and clouds and liquid water, but it lacked that singular touch, those vibrant colors, that liveliness that Earth had once had. The same one the colonies I had destroyed had also shared. No, the planet in front of me was dull in comparison. Its scarce clouds weren't puffy white but washed out gray and brown. Its seas were not aquamarine but murky, unappetizing. It didn't have those same green, lush forests and endless grass plains from those other worlds. Even its very location worked against it. It orbited a gas giant, which made it a moon, technically. The massive ball of turquoise clouds and its concentric rings stealing all the attention, all the spectacle. Compared to that majesty, the small, dull planet floating by was easy to ignore. Irrelevant. Except it was anything but. Looking into the lower part of the EM spectrum revealed the truth. There the planet shone. I could see the grid-like patterns of its extensive factories and the myriad transportation networks linking them together, the hundreds of kilometers-wide spaceports dotting its surface, the buried power conduits, energy flowing through them like blood through veins, giving life to manufacturing complexes and refineries the size of cities. The planet was immersed in a sea of radio transmissions, electromagnetic waves emanating from its surface like petals from a blooming flower. There were orbital assembly yards with both cargo freighters and warships still mid-construction, an almost continuous trail of spaceships entering and leaving its atmosphere, carrying goods and people, following the space lanes that would take them to the nearby systems or to the mineral processing outposts scattered throughout the gas giant's rings. No, the planet in front of me was anything but dull. It was one of those critical nodes, a junction, a crossroads of sorts, in the supply and production chains of the Zunvir Republic. Destroying it, taking it out, would be like removing the keystone from an arch. Halted production lines, entire pivotal industries vanishing and dying, lack of goods and transportation, scarcity, chaos. If I managed to win here, then I could just sit down and watch as the Zunvir Republic fragmented and crumbled under its own weight, reverting from an interstellar civilization back into a series of smaller, independent planetary nations. Which was the reason I was currently approaching the planet, along with 39 of my support ships, an attack swarm 1,400,000 units strong, and carrying more than 100,000 thermonuclear warheads. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. The Zunvirian fleet guarding the planet I had expected. It was composed of the ragged remains of their navy, huddled together and without any pretense at organized battle formations. It had both the ships that had survived the previous encounters and those that had stayed in the rear guard. Destroyers in need of repairs, old battleships that should have been decommissioned but had received a last-minute makeover instead, and modern cruisers straight out of the assembly line, their hulls still bare and without any paint coating. Them I had expected. It was the other fleet, the one that was almost 7 times as large as the Zunvirians, that looked like a mismatched congregation of warships of all origins and colors, some flashy and elegant, others curved and bulbous, some narrow and agile, others powerful and sturdy. The one whose ship's flanks were turned towards me, that blocked my path of advance towards both the planet and the Zunvirian fleet. That one I hadn't expected. The sight was imposing. It was meant to be. So many enemies, so many species, so much destructive power gathered against me. Their missile batteries, their hundreds of energy beam projectors, all aimed at either my support crafts or my own body. It was a message that required no words, a communication beyond language, the kind that could be found in the African savannah when 2 predators faced each other over a downed corpse. Which, of course, reminded me that the African savannah no longer existed. If I had any doubts, any uncertainty, they vanished. I kept my approach. With a thought, I released my swarm of drones, setting it to swirl around my body and the neighboring support ships, blanketing us like a protective, shifting shield. This time, the message, the radio signal, didn't come out of the Zunvirian fleet. It was the newcomers who talked. And they didn't send their communication in dozens of languages, didn't repeat it. It was delivered only once, in English. Hostile approaching fleet, codenamed as Terran. This is a message from the Galactic Federal Council. The Zunvir Republic and the planet of Anasax Farvan is under our protection. Cease immediately your approach, or you will be destroyed. This is the only warning you will receive. The word irked me. Terran. As if the only relevant thing about me, the only connection I still had with my origins was being from Earth. As if I wasn't worthy of being called human anymore. But I pushed that thought aside as I considered the situation. The fact that this Galactic Council was siding with the Zunvirians, and that they knew of my origins. How much else did they know? Were they aware of my nature? Did they know what the Zunvirians had done to Earth? Or maybe, had they themselves been complicit in the destruction of my species? A sickening thought crossed my mind as I remembered the 2 aliens I had let go. Had they gone running back to their homeworlds, crying about the big bad monster rampaging through the Zunvirians' territories? Was the presence of this fleet here my own fault? Something that I could have avoided had I just gunned down those 2? Was this their response to my attempt at coexistence? I considered ignoring the message, as I always did. But I didn't want to. Not this time. Maybe because the ones sending it weren't Zunvirians themselves. Maybe because I didn't want to justify their views about me, to solidify my status as some sort of mindless villain. It's not that I really cared that much about what they thought, but I still had myself to answer to. And in some way, I wanted to stand my ground, to be heard, even if they ended up siding with the Zunvirians anyways. "Leave," I transmitted back. "You are not my enemies. I don't wish to fight you." Strange to speak again. Ever since I woke up in the ruins of Earth, I hadn't pronounced a word, hadn't needed to use my voice modulator. I remember thinking that I would always be alone, that I wouldn't talk to anyone again. It seemed I had been wrong about the latter, at least. A few seconds passed without a response. I guessed they weren't expecting me to talk back, and were just going through the motions when they had sent their warning. I felt a faint amusement at the idea that just by speaking those few words I had already thrown a wrench in their carefully laid-out plan, sending them off script. Were the generals discussing how to proceed right now? Calling their leaders back home and asking for instructions? The different species that were represented in this fleet arguing to each other? I guess that was one of my advantages, not having to spend any time talking, convincing, coordinating different people and their agendas. No. My thoughts translated into plans and actions with the same speed and ease that I had once had when moving my own body. "Terran, we are glad you've decided to communicate," they replied at last. The voice still had a synthetic tone to it that told me they were using some sort of translation tool, but the rhythm and intonation were slightly different, as if they had switched whoever was behind the microphone. "We hope that we can reach an agreement to end this conflict, and we want to welcome you to the galactic community, provided you are willing to meet certain conditions. However, you must stop your approach immediately. Your unwarranted attack on the Zunvir Republic—" "Unwarranted?" I interrupted. "The Zunvirians destroyed my world, exterminated my own species down to the last one of us. If anything, I've been merciful so far." A pause. "Those allegations are new to us," they said. "We will start an investigation regarding your claims, and should they prove true—" "They are true!" I accompanied my response with a compressed info package of evidence, video and audio recordings of the destruction of some of Earth's cities. "I see. We will examine this information. If we determine it to be authentic, we can guarantee that the appropriate sanctions and provisions will be applied. We will also take it into consideration when judging your own recent actions. We can be lenient, but in return we need you to meet us midway and agree to our conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you need to stop your attacks right away. Second, we will return the conquered systems back to the Zunvir Republic and dismantle any resource extraction outposts and factories you might have built in them. Third, you will refrain from any sort of exponential growth and limit the construction of new ships and machines to a linear rate, which will have to be verified by a team of observers from the Council." A deep anger started boiling inside of me. Did they think I was stupid? "Right," I said. "So you want to disarm me, reduce me to the point where I can't fight back, where you can simply finish me off and complete the job the Zunvirians started? The answer is no." "That is not our intention, Terran. Our objective is merely to prevent more loss of life. We can guarantee that your existence and your rights as a sentient being will be respected, and that— Can you guarantee justice? That the Zunvirians will pay for what they did?" I hadn't reached the Council fleet yet, but already I ordered my drones to begin accelerating towards it, grouping them into smaller squadrons according to their attack patterns. "Justice, yes," they replied. "Justice, according to the law of the Galactic Federal Council. An impartial trial, driven by logic rather than emotion, where the Zunvirians can exercise their right to a defense, with economical and political sanctions in case they're found guilty, with those directly responsible going to prison. But not this. What you are doing is not justice. It's vengeance. So a slap on the wrist, in other words. You are siding with them." "Terran, we are not siding with—" "Yes, you are. You might not be directly responsible yourselves, but you are enabling their behavior. They commit a genocide, murder an entire species, and they get to keep going. They get to have a future. The one they denied us. No. This here is what they deserve. And even this will be just a fraction of what they unleashed on us." I had my support ships angle their flanks towards the enemy vessels, the laser projectors I had installed in them locking onto targets. "You can't pretend to fight the whole galaxy and win, Terran. This doesn't have to end like this. Stop now and we can discuss—" "No," I said. "Not until they've paid for what they've done. Until humanity has had its retribution. We have discussed enough. I don't want to be your enemy, but if you side with the Zunvirians, if you try to stop me from doing what is only fair, then you will be no better than them, and I will fight you. This is the only warning you will receive." With that, I ordered 5 of my large escort ships to open fire on one of the Zunvirian destroyers. Its protective shields came up immediately, wrapping the targeted vessel in the familiar-looking soapy bubble. But war was about numbers. It was about the output of the Zunvirian destroyer's power plant pitted against the combined potential of my 5 escort ships, of the efficiency of its radiators, emanating the immense energy the shield was receiving back into space as heat against the performance ratio of my re-engineered laser projectors. The destroyer exploded, wrapped in a blue flash. The Council fleet opened fire, targeting my main body and my support ships. The shield projectors I had installed kicked into action, withstanding the barrage as they drained energy from the ship's respective power plants. My swarm surged forward like a crashing wave. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of drones accelerating. A thick mass of ever-shifting formations, corkscrew and fractal patterns, the combined movement of its constituent units making it look like some sort of gigantic living organism, morphing and changing, pulsating, always evolving. But I knew where each drone was. I was in control, sending radio commands to each one of them, simultaneously telling each and every one of them how to move, where to go, receiving their responses, analyzing the feedback their sensors were always sending back to my central processing units. My mind integrating the information into a complete picture, the drones becoming part of me, a mere extension of my will. I always knew which of them carried laser projectors and which transported my army of assault soldiers. I was always aware of where each thermonuclear warhead was. Those I switched positions, kept them in permanent motion, weaving them in and out of formations, making sure they'd be hard to track by the enemy computers, easy to miss in the sea of machines, as if I was playing a shell game with the enemy fleet, one with thousands of simultaneous moves, one where the numbers were disproportionate and the stakes deadly. I aimed most of my assault soldiers towards the Council fleet. I guessed it wouldn't be easy, but I wanted to capture some of the unusual ships. I had already learnt all that the Zunvirian war technology had to teach me, and I was ready for the next step. If the crashed vessel I had found in the destroyed colony was any indication, The Council's species were more advanced than the Republic, and it looked like reverse engineering their technology could give me an extra edge. I had set my eyes on two of their largest ships in particular. One was marble white, its polished surface glinting under the vibrant light of the dozens of energy beams crossing the battlefield. It reminded me of a giant bone, as if I was looking at the femur of some titanic creature. The second target was the biggest battleship in their midst, a starfish-looking thing of iridescent blue and green colors. Its ventral energy weapon was activated, sending a continuous stream of heat and energy that went crashing into the shield that protected my main body, dwarfing the other attacks I was receiving. That amount of power, the sheer strength of that weapon. Yes, I wanted to take over that one ship. The amount of damage my body's shield was receiving from it was large enough that I expected it to collapse in less than a minute. So I had to resort to my escort ships. I ordered them to get close to my body, and to willingly put themselves in front of me, right in the path of the energy beam, to take the full onslaught for a few seconds at a time. It was a complex maneuver, but it worked. As the shield on one of the ships was about to collapse, it moved out of the way just to be replaced by the next one, all of them sharing the load in turns, helping each other so that none of them would be destroyed. As the front of my swarm neared the enemy formation, a few of the smaller council ships moved forward. The gold and green wedge-shaped frigates positioned themselves at the front of their fleet, between my swarm and their most valuable battleships, and opened fire on my drones with their laser projectors. Unlike what the Zenvirians had accustomed me to, these lasers weren't powerful. They didn't burn with the intensity of a small sun, weren't designed to take out battleship-class starships. No, these were low energy, thin white trails of light. But they had dozens, hundreds of them, each projector swiftly tracking a drone and burning it down, then rotating towards the next target without a pause. It was a good move, a good counter to my usual tactics. The Council had decided to go with quantity over quality for the energy weapons of their frigates. Apparently, they were aware that my drones lacked shields, and so had correctly deduced that even a weaker laser would be enough to dispatch them. Rather than firing one too powerful beam of energy at a single drone, they had opted for firing tens of less powerful ones, each at a different target, allowing them to burn faster through the swarm. Yes, a good move. I would have tipped my hat. It was a pity they were acting on outdated intel, though. I hadn't installed shields on all of my drones, of course. That would have been prohibitively expensive. No, what I had done was designed a new kind of support unit, one that only carried a shield, nothing else. I had built and placed several thousand of them scattered throughout the swarm. I set these shield drones to move forward now, accelerating through the thick of the swarm, the other crafts under my control moving out of the way in a choreographed motion to let them reach the front of the battle faster. With a thought, their shields came online, thousands of new soapy bubbles appearing all over the place, each one a few 100 meters wide, more than enough to cover both the machine casting it and its close neighbors, as if they were oversized umbrellas with room for an entire group of people. It wasn't nearly enough to cover the entirety of the swarm, of course, but I didn't need it to. I only needed to provide protection to the front lines, so to speak, to the drones leading the charge, the ones most battered by the onslaught of enemy fire. To their credit, the Council commanders reacted fast to this new development, as their frigates stopped spreading their fire among multiple machines and started focusing their beams into a single target, trying to get at the one shielding drone that was at the center of each bubble. Their previous decision to mount separate and weaker energy beams hindered them there, though. In the battle of numbers, focusing several independent laser projectors into a single target was less efficient than using a single, more powerful beam to begin with. There was simply more energy lost as heat to conductor resistance, more wasted power. Ironically, they would have been better off now had they not tried that one good move against me in the first place. But my shield drones weren't perfect either. They were small crafts, after all, their power plants not really capable of offsetting the combined attacks the bubbles were receiving for too long. So now and then their shields collapsed for a couple of seconds, the time their generators needed to cool off, to vent enough heat into space before the shields could be re-engaged safely. 2 seconds of vulnerability for every 12 seconds the shield was up. Didn't seem like much, but it was more than enough for the enemy laser beams to destroy the drone casting it. So I ordered the machines inside each protective bubble to swirl around the center shielder drone, making orbiting movements. spiraling clockwise and counterclockwise without ever leaving the protection of the spherical shield. It was an attempt at confusing the enemy's tracking systems, making more difficult their targeting of the shield. I even went so far as to synchronize their movement with the bubble's vulnerability periods, so that whenever a shield temporarily went down, one or two of my disposable drones would just happen to be in the path of the oncoming enemy beam, sacrificing themselves to protect the critical shield unit. It was maddening. The amount of radio traffic filling the empty space, the amounts of information I was sending and transmitting with every single second, the stress of coordinating the movements of more than 1 million vehicles, of making sure each of them was at the right place at the right time, of tracking enemy projectiles and calculating their future paths so that my machines could dance around them. I had never fought like this. It was crazy. It was intense. It required my every thought, my every processing cycle. And I loved it. I cherished every second of it. I was making nested fractal patterns, designing paths that followed Fibonacci spirals, that drew sequences inside sequences, numerical progressions that manifested as whirling formations, apparent chaos that spontaneously resolved as order before disappearing again. The drones moved with fluidity, weaving in and out of complex evolving configurations that I didn't have time to consciously register before they were gone. With no room for second-guessing, no time for overanalyzing my decisions, I was acting on pure instinct now, an instinct I didn't know I had, sending orders and applying patterns just because they felt right. And they were right. Pure. It was a thing of beauty, of numbers that only I could see, a work of art only I could appreciate, that nobody else knew even existed. And as the battle raged outside, as missiles crossed the skies and ships died and explosions blinded sensors and whirling drone formations wrapped around battleships, I was fighting an inner battle of my own, every bit as intense. My processing units were in overdrive, my server farms burning hot. I was shifting through oceans of information, analyzing and correlating and projecting thousands of paths into the future, sending orders and receiving torrential amounts of input data from my million eyes, constructing models of the battlefield and optimizing data structures, prioritizing targets and going through massive indexes to find the key attack patterns I needed to use. I had drones surround the Vanguard Council frigates, spiral around them, cut their hulls open with dozens of moving laser beams. I discarded an entire data set when I realized the battlefield had moved towards the upper levels of the brown planet's atmosphere, the minuscule drag created by the scattered atoms of nitrogen and oxygen, nullifying some of my projections. Not by much, but I was standing over a very narrow edge, working at the very limit of my machine's abilities. Drones sometimes flying right by each other with only 2 or 3 meters to spare. It had to be perfect. 2 Zunvirian battleships tried to flank the thick of my swarm, taking advantage of the confusing battlefield. But I wasn't confused. I had already estimated the high likelihood of their maneuver, and had placed 10 nuclear warheads in their predicted path. I detonated them now, the battleships vanishing inside the bright flashes. My assault soldiers were now crawling across the outer hulls of the targeted battleships. I had them look for entrances, blow open vents and force their way through narrow openings. I was winning. Despite the unexpected appearance of a new, numerous enemy, despite the higher technology the Council fleet was deploying, despite their clever tactics designed to counter mine, I knew I was winning. The enemy fleet had managed to contain the tide of the swarm somewhat, but I knew their defensive positions were compromised, their entire formation about to collapse. I had only to push a bit further, a bit harder. And then everything changed. It felt like a slap to the face, like being showered in cold water out of the blue. I wasn't entirely sure of what had happened, but I immediately knew something was very wrong. My view had fragmented. I could no longer hold a cohesive picture of the battlefield in my mind. I couldn't integrate all the information I was receiving from my drones into a single model. Instead, I now had separate views, conflicting narratives. Drones popped in and out of my awareness, blinking like Christmas lights, as if they were being destroyed and immediately brought back to life. And I wasn't sure of where exactly any of my machines were anymore. I had 2 or 3 different positions for each, as if they had somehow doubled in my mind. I was still trying to direct them, but their movements had turned spasmodic. My orders were inconsistent, and I couldn't visualize the swarm as a whole anymore. The carefully constructed patterns and formations were unraveling fast. As drone collided into drone, as they drifted out of the protective bubbles and were promptly destroyed, as order turned into chaos. I felt a cold fear in my gut. A sinking feeling. Something was seriously wrong here. Was the problem caused by my own mind, somehow? Had one of my server farms crashed, crippling me? Was I having a virtual stroke of sorts? I launched a desperate, quick diagnostic process to check my own databanks, my own processors and internal systems. It was a basic analysis, I knew, but everything looked okay. So what was it then? I turned my attention towards a single drone. Ignoring the rest of the now disorganized swarm, I ordered it to engage its thrusters and move forward. It didn't. The cold fear turned icy. I repeated the order. This time the machine obeyed, moving forward, but something odd happened. The drone was still reporting being at its old position, even though I could see it had moved through the visual sensors in my body. The mismatch caused it to double in my mind, as if it had suddenly turned into two separate machines. One still, the other moving forward. Odd, disconcerting, nauseating. I told the machine to stop, but it ignored me and kept advancing, getting into the path of another drone. The two crafts collided at high speed, destroying each other. Had all my drones suddenly turned stupid? Had the enemy hacked them? No, I noticed they were still following their programming, their last orders. It was more like if they... I glanced into the low EM spectrum, paying more attention to the transmissions I was receiving, both from the drones as well as the background radio waves coming out of the planet. And then it clicked. The problem wasn't in my drones, nor in my own processing units. No, they were all working just fine. The problem was that I was being jammed. The Zunvirians had tried that before, of course. They had tried to drown my communications in a deep blanket of EM noise, or use EM pulses against me. But invariably they had failed. My signals always came ahead, my transmitters too strong, my drones' electronics too well shielded and designed to work in an environment where nuclear warheads were going off left and right. I couldn't be jammed. Except the Council had apparently found a way. All the orders I was sending to my machines, all the feedback the drones were relaying back to me, it was all scrambled, distorted. All the signals, all the radio transmissions I was receiving or emitting were garbled, warped, doubled, and tripled, just like light passing through some sort of strangely curved kaleidoscope. When I glanced into the EM spectrum, I felt like I was watching the world through eyeglasses that didn't fit my prescription. I didn't even know such a thing was even possible, let alone how they were doing it. Some of my messages survived the process relatively intact, and parts of the information the drones were relaying still contained some consistency by the time they reached me, which is why I still had some degree of control, spasmodic as it was. But it wasn't enough. Not to fight at the level I needed to. War was numbers, and I had just lost mine. As if to cement that thought, the enemy fleet opened fire, with all their energy beams at the same time, with a salvo of missiles, ignoring the swarm, focusing all their fire, all their destructive power on a single target. Me. My shields kicked in, my power plant struggling to keep up under the combined barrage. I started extending my radiator panels to vent the excess heat, even though I knew doing so in combat would risk the delicate surfaces getting damaged. But I needed an edge. I needed that extra 5% efficiency I knew I could get if I wanted to survive this attack. That was when the supercharged beam of the Starfish battleship opened fire again, targeting me. I only had a fraction of a second of warning before my shields gave way. I could still feel pain, I discovered. A very toned-down version. Not the kind of pain I remembered feeling in the past. Not like that one time when I had accidentally cut my hand with a kitchen knife. No. This was different. Muted but oddly similar. I felt the impact, the heat, the shock, the loss, the failure. The powerful energy beam burned through my ceramic plates, straight past my second and third armor layers. It vaporized its way through internal storehouses and drone assembly factories. It cut fuel lines and energy conduits. I watched through the cameras inside my body, as an expanding ball of flames and heat advanced along kilometers worth of maintenance corridors. Walls bursting, sensors dying, and platforms collapsing in its wake. I didn't have time to take stock. No time to evaluate the damage I had just received before I felt the next impact. The next laser beam cutting deep into my structure and destroying one of my auxiliary thrusters. The resulting explosion shocking my entire body. They were killing me. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one today. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, man. This is a fun turning point in this. And by fun, I mean not fun and scary and sad. This whole series is really great. And I love, the existential kind of stuff that it delves into. But, man, it has some moments. Again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me why you don't like a certain vegetable. Because, I don't get why people don't like vegetables. Because I fucking love them. I'll eat fucking anything. I love food. But anyway, guys, have a great one. I love you. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye, y'all. Nope, wait, hold on. I didn't hit the right button.